If you think old war movies are slow or boring, just wait till you see what these guys did with no CGI and no big budgets. Let's see which hidden 50s war film is actually the most incredible today. When Attack played at the Venice Film Festival, it actually caused a full-blown diplomatic scene. The U.S. ambassador stormed out in protest. The Pentagon hated the script, called it anti-American, and then blacklisted the entire production. They refused to loan out any tanks, uniforms, or soldiers, and Robert Aldrich, the director, couldn't even get access to real combat footage. So Aldrich rented a couple tanks with his own money, set up the shots with clever camera work, and faked having a bigger army. The story takes place in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. You have Jack Palance and Eddie Albert leading the cast. Both of them served in World War II for real. There's some real irony here. Eddie Albert, who plays the cowardly Captain Cooney, was actually a war hero who saved over 70 Marines and received a Bronze Star. In the film, though, he's the weak link, a captain only in charge because his colonel friend, played by Lee Marvin, covers for him. Jack Palance plays Lieutenant Costa, who ends up leading a platoon that Cooney sends into danger, then leaves hanging. Costa begs for reinforcements. Cooney won't move. Tension cranks up until Costa snaps and swears revenge. This one barely gets mentioned anymore, but it's actually one of the best submarine movies ever made. The plot sets an American destroyer led by Robert Mitchum's Captain Merle against a German U-boat commanded by Kurt Jürgens as Captain von Stolberg. Both men know what they're doing, both are professionals, and the film focuses on their duel in the South Atlantic. It's a tight 98-minute game of cat and mouse, all tactics and suspense. The visuals set this movie apart. When you see Robert Mitchum standing on the deck with real depth charges going off behind him, you know they shot this for real. There's barely any special effects except for some above-average underwater U-boat footage. The destroyer you see is the actual USS Whitehurst, a real World War II ship. The German submarine was recreated with a full-scale model. Albert Beck, a former German submariner, served as technical advisor here to make the submarine scenes authentic. The script is based on D.A. Rayner's novel. Rayner himself served in the Royal Navy. The Enemy Below won the 1958 Oscar for Best Special Effects. Those explosions and miniature work still hold up. And Kurt Jürgens later said, "This was an important picture for me because it was the first film after the war in which a German officer was not shown as a freak." Most people have seen The Great Escape, but before that, there was The Wooden Horse, a real-life escape story told just 5 years after the war. 3 British prisoners at Stalag Luft 3 come up with an idea that's equal parts crazy and brilliant. They build a hollow wooden vaulting horse, carry it out to the yard every day for exercise, and while one guy vaults, another guy digs a tunnel straight down, hidden inside the horse. Every day, the team rotates. Some dig, some distract the guards with gymnastics, all to cover up the noise. The film streamlines a few things, but the core story is true. It's a patient, suspenseful movie about nerve and ingenuity, not about big battles. The film's based on the novel by Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams, one of the 3 real prisoners who escaped. For realism, they shot on location in Germany, rebuilding a camp set near Lüneburg Heath, close to where German forces surrendered. And it worked. Critics praised how real it all felt. Even Variety highlighted its commendable degree of documentary fidelity. Most people have forgotten about this one, but in 1951, Decision Before Dawn got a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars. Set during the final days of World War II, the story follows a young German army medic who turned spy for the Allies. It's based on actual events. At the end of the war, Allied intelligence recruited and trained German prisoners to return home and gather information. They filmed it on location in post-war Germany. The cities were still bombed out, and the production made use of real German military equipment. There were actual tanks, uniforms, and rifles from the war. The authenticity of the locations and props gives the film a feeling that you rarely see in other war movies. For people who lived through the war, Decision Before Dawn must have felt almost too real. The story doesn't go for spectacle or big hero moments. Instead, it shows the everyday tragedy of war with a sense of realism that still stands out. This one tells the story of Operation Mincemeat, one of the most remarkable deception operations of World War II. To trick the Germans into thinking the Allies would invade somewhere other than Sicily, British intelligence came up with a plan. They created a fake officer complete with documents and floated the body ashore where the Germans would find it. The officer who ran the real-life operation even shows up for a cameo as an air marshal in the film. He also wrote the book that the movie is based on. The ruse worked. German decrypts later showed that their commanders fell for the bait and shifted reinforcements away from Sicily. The full impact is still debated, but the Allies took Sicily with fewer losses than expected and much faster than anyone predicted. The film itself skips unnecessary subplots and sticks to the essentials, keeps the story suspenseful and focused. The mostly British cast is well chosen and believable, and the ending hits hard. Even decades later, the film still works, as a piece of suspense, as a war story, and as a look at one of the great real-life tricks of the war. Anthony Mann is usually remembered for his epic westerns, but with Men in War, he made his one and only war film. Set during the Korean War, the film follows a small, exhausted group of American soldiers led by Robert Ryan as Lieutenant Benson and Aldo Ray as Montana, both at odds from the very start. They're cut off behind enemy lines and have to reach Hill 465 for possible relief. Mann brings his Western storytelling to the battlefield, uses tight camera work and editing to make the tension feel immediate. The story's more about survival and conflict within the unit than about defeating the enemy. The influence of Men in War can be seen later in movies like The Thin Red Line. Critics and filmmakers both point to this film as a kind of hidden masterpiece. For a long time, Men in War was considered lost. Thankfully, it's now restored, and its reputation as one of the best American war films of the era keeps growing. Anthony Mann never returned to the war genre, but with this one film, he left his mark. People always talk about Nolan's Dunkirk, but there's a 1958 version a lot of folks just forget about. Totally different kind of movie, but still great. The story splits in two. On one side, you've got a squad of British soldiers stuck behind enemy lines in France, fighting to reach the Dunkirk beaches. At the same time, back in Britain, Bernard Lee plays a newspaper reporter doing everything he can to wake up the public about what's really going on and why everyone back home needs to help. This production was massive for its time. Producer Michael Balcon said it was the biggest thing he'd ever worked on, and he wasn't new to this. It paid off too. Dunkirk became the second highest grossing film in the UK that year. The Young Lions also came out in 1958. Another big war drama, but a totally different feel. This one goes heavy on the cast. Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and Dean Martin. Three main characters, three angles on the war. Brando plays a German officer who loses faith in the Nazi cause. Clift plays a Jewish-American soldier dealing with Nazis abroad, but also anti-Semitism inside his own unit. Dean Martin's a nightclub singer who never wanted to be there at all, drafted and forced into combat. The story jumps between their different lives, then brings them together in ruined Germany. Here's where things get interesting. Brando hated his role. He thought Fox made his Nazi character too sympathetic just to keep from upsetting West Germany during the Cold War. He even rewrote a bunch of his own dialogue, only for the studio to cut most of it anyway. That was it for Brando. After this movie, he decided no studio would ever tell him how to play a part again. Samuel Fuller fought in World War II before he ever made movies, and you see that experience all over Fixed Bayonets. This is his Korean War story about a platoon forced to stay behind during a retreat, basically left to slow down the enemy and buy time for everyone else. Their odds are not good. It's a tense survival movie, shot cheap, less than $1 million, mostly on one soundstage. Gene Evans, who plays the sergeant, was no Hollywood star. They picked him because he'd actually fought in World War II. Fuller pushed for as much realism as he could. His first cut was so honest about war experiences, the studio actually made him dial it back to pass the censors. Still, veterans loved it. The Army even used scenes from Fixed Bayonets to prepare soldiers psychologically for rearguard duty, not for fighting, but for what it actually felt like to get left behind. Here's one Hollywood really took a risk on. The Desert Fox is about Erwin Rommel, played by James Mason, a German general who eventually joins the plot to kill Hitler. At the time, this was a huge gamble. It was the first major American movie to show a Nazi in a sympathetic light, as an honorable soldier stuck in an impossible situation. Fox executives worried about how people would react, but American audiences, especially veterans, actually liked it. Rommel had a reputation as a brilliant tactician, and the film leans into that. In the UK, though, things went differently. British veterans groups staged protests outside theaters, furious that the movie seemed to clean up Rommel's reputation. Even so, The Desert Fox grossed over $2 million, impressive for a war biopic of the era. In the US, it did so well Fox quickly followed up with a sequel called The Desert Rats.